Happy members of the audience with us this evening, and I certainly would like to let you know a little later how we intend to proceed in terms of you participating in our program this evening. This program is being broadcast live on wVent 93.5 and 94.7 and Choice TV St. Lucia, and on the CSS Gem Radio in Trinidad, Antigua, St. Kitts, and Montserrat. It is also live on the World Wide Web via the wVent website at www.wventradio.com and the CSS Gem Radio website at www.yourcss.net. We'll be repeating these web addresses throughout our program this evening. Why a town hall meeting, you may ask? Well, first of all, it is in fact the official launch of wVent, the talk radio station in St. Lucia. And so what better way to launch but to bring together the movers and the shakers of our beloved country in this distinguished panel to discuss the issues we face as a country. Issues of the economy, social issues such as crime, unemployment, and health, as well as issues of politics and the government. All this and more need to be discussed and solutions sought. And of course, you the people also need to be involved in this discussion. And so we have a good turnout and microphones in the audience so that you can have your say as part of wVent. Now today, the highlight of our discussion is of course the economy. And we do have with us Mr. Richard Peterkin, who will place this in context by offering us a 15-minute presentation. Most of us locally know Mr. Peterkin as being involved with the International Olympic Committee. But Richard is the partner in charge of tax and transaction services at Grand Thornton Windward Islands. He has provided assurances, business advisory, recovery, and corporate services to a wide variety of clients over the last 37 years. He has lived in Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, England, and Canada, and has attained degrees in economics and commerce from the University of the West Indies and the University of Windsor, respectively. He is currently a member of the Canadian Institute of Chartered Accountants and also of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of the Eastern Caribbean. Let's welcome Mr. Richard Peterkin.
Thank you, Jerry, and good night to everyone here. I'm glad to hear I'm a mover and shaker. It always helps in things that you do in life that you are seen to that. Tonight, my main focus is really to try and put a little bit of perspective to some of the issues that are facing us as a nation, as a people, so that we can now hear from the other panelists as perhaps different opinions from mine, or other matters that they believe to be of significance and need to be addressed. Clearly, 15 minutes would never be sufficient time in order to, give an analysis of the economy. The last time I did this for First Caribbean Investment Services, it took me 50 minutes. So to try and condense this into 15 minutes, I'm probably going to have to move a little faster. And obviously, I won't have that much time. Well, you'll get a chance afterwards, and after the other panelists have had a word, to get in any questions, make any comments you want. But the hope is tonight that we're not going to get into just comments, and really and truly there should be interaction to try and find out, to listen to what those have to say, and get down to some of the salient issues, and hopefully in which we have no real disagreement. We may have disagreement on the strategies, but hopefully not the reality of where we are and what we face. And so, unfortunately, we would have liked to have had some of the other folks that hopefully we thought were coming tonight. They're not all here, but we have a wonderful panel that is going to take us through all the issues. So I'd like to start with my presentation. and hopefully you can see on the screen. The first thing that I want to make quite clear in the caveats and disclaimers is that the views and opinions expressed tonight are those of myself, not those of my firm, Grant Thornton, not those of wVent, but certainly just myself. Secondly, that the facts and the information that the presentation is based on are basically available publicly in sources that you can all access on the web. For example, the Social and Economic Research, ECCB website, IMF website, World Bank, annual estimates, all of these things is what I'm basing it on. I'm not making up these numbers. These numbers are largely generated from the technocrats in the statistics and the other ministries of finance and economics. And there may be mistakes. Over the years, we've had to obviously revise a lot of things, but it's facts. And also that I'm not formally affiliated or associated with any political party or organization, neither yellow or red. And I'm not presently a member of any national committee, task force, advisory panel, vision committee, only sports organizations. Okay, my first comment on current and economic issues is just a comment that was made by Dr. Anthony in his budget statement, in which he indicated the 4 basic challenges that confront us: low economic growth rates, persistently high unemployment, especially amongst our youth, inherently high vulnerability due to economic and natural shocks, we know about those, and fiscal deficits and high debt levels faced by the government. In effect, the operations of government are not sustainable in the long run without adjustments. The second comment from Sir Dwight Venner, the governor of the central bank, in his 2013 Eastern Caribbean Currency Union economic review, was that the fundamental problem facing governments in small development states such as ours is the absolute cost of government. With relatively small tax bases and the need to provide basic services, these states have serious fiscal challenges, and the objective of such states must therefore be to operate low-cost and highly efficient and effective administrations. And the third comment from the Honorable Ralph Gonzalez, the Prime Minister of St. Vincent, and I'm using this deliberately because I'll come back to him in a little later, is that the issues at stake for St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and probably for Barbados, include efficient public expenditure, the containment of recurrent expenditure, efficacious debt management, optimal tax administration, economic growth, job and wealth creation, social cohesion, and a reduction in social inequality. These are very challenging and not amenable to quick fixes, particularly in small open resource challenged economies in the context of a global economic slowdown. The next comment is from the IMF themselves, and sometimes we need to look at the IMF. A lot of people seem to think it's a hostile organization determined to kind of run little countries into the ground. Not quite so. But in their presentation on Caribbean small states, challenges of high debt and low growth in February of 2013, they said that most countries in the region share similar economic characteristics, so therefore we are not sui generis. That is to say, St. Lucia and the OECS, we're not so unique that our issues are so different from those of other countries. We share the same concerns, and the comments that they are making are not just even about Caribbean countries, they're about small countries all over the world. And those that listened and watched some of the stuff from the recent conference in Samoa would certainly be aware of that. The second is that growth in the Caribbean has stagnated in the last 2 decades, except in commodity exporters. So, okay, Trinidad and perhaps a little bit in Guyana, where they have commodities, a little easier for them because they have something to sell other than some of the service-based activities that the rest of us are involved in. Thirdly, that many Caribbean economies face high and rising debt to GDP ratios that jeopardize prospects for medium-term debt sustainability and growth. And lastly, that the main challenges for Caribbean small states looking ahead include low growth, high debt, reducing vulnerabilities from natural disasters, as well as financial sector weaknesses. So what you see in all of those 4 are very similar things. From the Prime Minister, from the Governor of the Central Bank, from the IMF, from Christine Lagarde in her recent stay in Jamaica, and from Ralph Gonzalez. Nothing different. All looking at exactly the same problems, some of which have been brought about as a result of the global meltdown, economic recession of 2008 onwards, some of which has been brought about because of problems that we have inherited because of the way that administrations, present, past, whatever, have run the countries, perhaps in their best interest, they thought, but leaving us with legacies of debt and problems in sustaining and meeting our expenses on an annual basis. So what you see here is a quick graph of essentially our growth. And it ain't growth, it's negative. And it's been negative for years. And we've been told by the economists regionally, internationally, that the only way that countries like ourselves and Louisy will ever prosper is if we get growth in excess of 6% or more. And we haven't had that in years. The levels of growth when we had it were small, very low, almost flat. And certainly over the last couple of years, as you can see there, they have been negative. And the strategy that you must follow, if you cannot get back to economic growth at a reasonable level, then none of the things as a government, as a country that we would like to do, the lifestyles that we'd like to live are going to be achievable or sustainable. So that is one of the key factors when we examine the problems that we presently have. The next is some of our key economic indicators for the last 3 years. Some of them not good, some of them maybe a little some improvement, but overall clearly indicating that the economy is not performing in the manner in which it has to be if it is going to provide us with the kind of long-term growth that we would get. So if you look, for example, at GDP at nominal prices, what you see is being flat. The overall deficit in millions from going down a little bit from 334 to 206. But what it means is we are, in essence, projecting to spend more money than we actually make as a country and leaving us with a deficit that is funded to a large extent by borrowing. And that has its own issues, as any of you would know, when you try to do something and you need the money to do it. But borrowing it comes with its own issues in terms of getting and paying that money back. The deficit to GDP at 9.4% was way above the levels that are regarded as sustainable and clearly in the kind of very difficult territory. And while there has been some movement down to 5.8, unless we can get it to 3% or lower, we are going to be in the same bind we've been in for the last 3 years. The current account deficit, meaning even on a current basis, we're not making the kind of money to meet our current expenditure. And that's come down a bit, but it's come down as a result of having to implement a lot of strategies, which quite frankly, not everybody is happy with. But it's something that we must do. Because the whole idea of a sound economy and sound fiscal management is that you must produce fiscal surpluses on a current basis that you can then use to finance part of your capital expenditure, so you don't end up having to go and borrow all the money on regional and international, or to tax people to the point where they can't breathe. And so that is one of the most critical things, that current account deficit. Our public debt, as you can see, has gone up from 2.2 to 2.6, and as a percentage of GDP from 65 to 73.6. There's no magic in some of these numbers. There are some countries that have debt to GDP, like Japan, of almost 200%. The difference is Japan's borrowing is all local, and their own people are quite happy to continue to buy the government bonds, so the government can continue to borrow them. We don't have that same luxury. We end up having to go on regional markets to borrow, and so from that point, it then puts us into a bind, not only in terms of how much we owe, but the amount we have to spend in our current expenditure to service that debt. So that is a problem. And the last, of course, is the unemployment rate, which, as you can see, has gone from 21 to 23. This figure, nobody really knows for sure what the real rate is, and I understand that the rate for young people may be as high as 40% in certain instances. And that is horrendous. If people lose hope that there is something for them in life, if they leave school, when they leave university, then we are going to lose our best people, and we're going to have people essentially unable to function in our society, ending up in endeavors which we all know, crime, drugs, etc., which is clearly not healthy. So, what are our options? We don't really have a lot of options, and this has been one of the problems with budgets. The government's options as to what to do have been declining, have been dwindling. because they're faced with issues that they cannot overcome simply by budgeting and deciding to do something. One of our options, I always remember Osbert the Verne telling me that if we have a problem with our debt to GDP, it's a simple fix. You just grow the economy and your debt to GDP goes down. Well, that's true. But the problem is, how do you grow the economy if you've seen those kind of anemic rates or declines that we've had? So the question is, in this budget, in previous years' budgets, is there a growth strategy to bring us back to a point where, as a result of coordinated action from the public and private sector, we can really and truly almost guarantee that there will be positive growth in the years ahead? It is to some extent not that easy to find that growth strategy in budgets over the years, and it may be an indication, as I said, of those difficult or declining options the government has. Are there any sectors growing? The answer, of course, is yes, because tourism remains a growing sector, and fortunately for St. Lucia, it's a sector that's growing faster than a number of countries in the Caribbean. But the question is it enough? Is tourism by itself going to be able to get us out of this hole? Or are there other factors and other sectors that we need to move along? And the answer is, obviously, if you can't get all your sectors working together, if you don't get the linkages that tourism can, in fact, generate in manufacturing, in agriculture, then you're always going to have lagging sectors that are going to draw the economy down in other areas. So even though the economy declined last year, it might have been worse had tourism also declined. And that's maybe a factor a lot of people don't see, because there is an attitude towards tourism which clearly needs to be sorted out. Foreign direct investment is clearly the only way we can get dramatic growth, as we got during the years running up to the World Cup in 2007. That was also not just the World Cup, it was a global property boom, bubble, if you ask me, in which people were spending money as if it was going out of style, borrowing it way above prudential levels, buying land at unreasonable prices, and that happened here in St. Lucia. In fact, there are a number of millionaires that we now have as a result of selling their beachfront during the right time. For those who didn't, now they can't sell. So the extent to which we can get back to foreign direct investment and a construction-led growth, combined with the growth that we're seeing in tourism and growth in the linkages sectors, manufacturing and agriculture, as well as whatever diversification we can find in other areas, which is difficult, then we'll never and truly have the kind of options that we would like to have.
Mr. Peterkin, I just need to interrupt you. Your time is
running
up.
out. Okay.
Yeah, so if you can just use the last minute that you have left to sum up.
Okay.
You will join us a little later, and I'm sure that we can benefit from some of the other points that you may have in your presentation.
Okay, Chair. I'll do my best. Then the other options are stimulus, a prudent reduction, or austerity. Not always options that you want to take. Some of the options, as I said, in tourism, if we want, for example, to go to a stimulus package, then we don't have the luxury of monetary policy. Then we therefore have to try and find additional borrowing in order to do that capital expenditure, and that's not easy. A prudential reduction of expenditure through productivity gains, salary freezes, not easy, takes much longer than we would like it. And increases in taxation is not an option. We are already overtaxed, and so from that is not the way that we're going to solve our problems. As Ralph Gonzalez in his budget, as I was telling you earlier, is saying that he's not going through austerity. He's not going for salary cuts. He's not going for any large cuts, and he's going to what he calls a policy of prudence. Easier said than done, and maybe St. Vincent doesn't have the same depth of problems that we do, but it certainly shows that there are, in fact, other strategies. Some of the other alternative strategies would be a gradual or balanced approach in public sector reform. The question is, can we do that in time? Or severe austerity with salary cuts, but extending the burden to all sectors, as happened in Dominica in 2003, where in addition to 6% salary cuts, they introduced a 4% stabilization levy. Or agreements with friendly countries and sovereign wealth funds that can reduce our cost of borrowing, reschedule debt, and fund a stimulus program. So, in conclusion, what we really need to do to get all of this done is to build a national consensus. And how we do that is difficult when we are finding ourselves in so many different issues in which we seem to be at odds with each other. We need better dispute resolution mechanisms to deal with conflicts and confrontation in a fair and transparent manner. Because as Derek Walcott said, the future happens no matter how much we scream. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As I indicated earlier, we will be returning some more to Mr. Peterkin. At this time, let me introduce you to our panelists this evening. Starting on my far left is Dr. Ernest Hilaire. Dr. Hilaire has a wide range of experiences which span politics, sports management, and diplomacy. He served as personal assistant to Prime Minister Dr. Kenny Anthony in 1997, and in 1999 became the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Youth and Sports. I'll just truncate some of the bio that have been given. Dr. Hilaire is well placed to serve in his latest role as ambassador, given his strong background in diplomacy. He joined the Foreign Service in 1993 after attaining a double first in political science and sociology, and later honed his diplomatic training with a master's in philosophy in international affairs from Cambridge and a PhD from the London School of Economics. He also possesses a diploma in negotiations from Notre Dame University. As St. Lucia's chief diplomat in Europe, a key part of his responsibility is to promote trade and investment opportunities in St. Lucia. Let's have a round of applause for Mr. Hilaire. I'd also like to introduce you to Brian Louisy, who is the Executive Director of the St. Lucia Chamber of Commerce, Industry and Agriculture in St. Lucia. It's a private sector organization, and he's also a private sector observer on the PPCR subcommittee. Brian has over 25 years of experience in development work in both the public and private sector. He has been active in the fields of private sector development advocacy, business support services, trade negotiations, export development, sustainable development, development planning, and competitiveness through that period. He has built a strong network of partners through the Caribbean region to promote these issues on a regional level. We also have with us, and he's on my right, Dr. Claudius Preville, who's an economist, negotiator, trade policy advisor, writer, speaker, and project manager for over 20 years of professional experience. In June 2012, Dr. Preville founded the firm Preville and Associates Consulting Group, a consultancy specializing in the delivery of services in the areas of economic development, negotiation, and business management. Dr. Preville has taught economics at the postgraduate level in Europe and the Caribbean since the 1990s. He obtained his PhD specializing in economics development from the Institute of Social Studies of Erasmus University in the Netherlands in January 2003. Let's all welcome all our panelists. Absent, I must inform you, is Mrs. Mary Isaac, as you know, the chief representative for the major public service trade union in St. Lucia, who sends apologies for being absent here this evening. But gentlemen, you would have heard the presentation by Mr. Peterkin, and we can sum it up by saying it's a bleak environment, few options, but we must have national consensus. I'd like to first go to Dr. Hilaire. How does your government, or what has the government done in terms of addressing the situation that we are now in?
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Let me first of all thank Mr. Peterkin for his presentation, because I think if you listen carefully to what Richard said, you would have received a comprehensive examination of where we are as a country and the options for us to move forward. And you would see in his presentation a reflection of some of the actions that have been taken by the present government. Let me start off by making a couple of points. it is almost useless for us to engage in a debate as to why we reach where we've reached and how we've reached where we've reached. And I think the Prime Minister has made the point, and certainly in Richard's presentation you would see such clearly stated, we've reached a point of critical decision making. We are at a point in our history where we need to ensure that the fundamentals for the growth that Richard spoke about that is necessary can be attained. The truth is, past governments have sought to achieve high growth rates by spending more. And to spend more, they borrowed more. And of course, it is clearly stated, and if you listen to reports on China, on India, on Brazil, they all speak of having a sustained period of high growth rates to be able to transform their societies. So China is speaking of 20 years of growth rates of between 8 to 10% to be able to transform China into a modern society. How then do you achieve high growth rates? Of course, you need to spend more. How have we done it in the past? There've been borrowing taking place. The simple truth is we cannot continue to do so. So we've had the practices in the past by both governments that we've had in the modern, the post-independence era of high borrowing, high expenditure to ensure high growth rates and to transform the country. Richard made the point that what is probably necessary now is high levels of FDI, foreign direct investment. And I think as an ambassador, I find myself very often in gatherings discussing that very issue, as well as meeting investors regularly, discussing the issue of investment in our country. For us to be able to achieve the growth that we spoke about, the two is essentially that you can do it. Having the foreign direct investment or through indigenous capital formation, having the money to spend on production of goods and services for us to export to own the monies that are needed. The simple truth is we do not have the kind of natural resources in our country or the kinds of savings that Richard spoke about when he referred to Japan that would allow us to finance our economic development indigenously. So essentially the money must come from outside. We can either export more, but can we really export that much to earn so much to ensure our development? And again, simple examples. We're talking about we just launched in the UK the Taste of St. Lucia campaign to sell St. Lucian products in the UK. And if Sainsbury's says to you, every month I need 40,000 cases of tomato ketchup, and you ask the question, can we produce at that level? And when you have some of the demands that some of the suppliers, some of the supermarkets and other outlets in the UK would require, you realize we're not even at that level of output, that level of production. So where is it going to come from? So essentially we must, as a priority moving forward, seek to attract foreign direct investment. And the government in the last couple of years have taken two decisive steps in that regard to ensure we create an environment in St. Lucia that can attract foreign direct investment. There have been the transformation of the National Development Corporation into Invest St. Lucia, and to try to streamline the processes by which business can be initiated and conducted in St. Lucia. It is a process that has to continue, and we've seen in the last few months Invest St. Lucia hosting an international investment conference in St. Lucia to bring in investors to see what it is that St. Lucia has to sell. And secondly, you would have heard in recent time a revision of the incentives regime in St. Lucia to offer more attractive incentives to investors wanting to come into St. Lucia. And only 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister announced the establishment of a task force to look at citizenship by investment as an additional tool to offer to investors wanting to come into the country. So the government has taken, certainly in the last 2 years or so, a number of distinct steps to try to attract foreign direct investment into St. Lucia. Because I think we've reached a point where you recognize we cannot continue to borrow to finance our development at the levels at which we were doing before. We need to be able to attract investment to come into the country. But if investment is going to come into St. Lucia, we have to be competitive. An investor coming into the country would want to ensure that his ROI, his return on investment, is sufficiently high. Therefore, you need to have some fundamentals in place in the country. Your productivity either has to be very high, or the cost of doing business in St. Lucia would have to be low enough for that investor to be able to get the returns that he wants. And therefore, the focus has to be on what is the productivity of the St. Lucian workforce? Is it such that it can compete with other destinations? And the second question is whether or not the cost of doing business, that is driven primarily, in our instance, by the wage level, is such that we can be competitive and attractive as an investment destination.
Dr. Hilaire, what I will do is come back to you, as well as come back to Mr. Brian Louisy a little later to answer some of these concerns. But let's go over to Dr. Claudius Preville. You heard Dr. Hilaire. Considering the environment which we have stated, and considering the fact that he has mentioned that steps have already been taken, do you think enough has been done, at least from your perspective, as well as the perspective of the party you represent here this evening, the United Workers' Party? And could more be done in terms of improving the situation?
Okay, thank you very much, Jerry, and good evening to panelists. Good evening, Richard, and thanks for your lucid presentation. I think Richard's presentation set the stage quite nicely for the discussion tonight. However, I don't necessarily agree with the perspectives taken, not the data as such, the perspectives and where we've been led to on this discussion. The first thing I want to say is that Albert Einstein told us you cannot solve a problem with the same type of thinking that created it. And for this reason, you know, the discussion that we are here, forget about how we got here, let's just move on and solve it, that discussion for me is irrelevant, because if you put the same people who made the mess before, you're going to have the same problem again, okay? And so the history matters. I think we have to appreciate the fact that, unlike what was said about the importance of debt for economic growth, when the Kenny-Anthony administration took over St. Lucia in 1997, we had a debt of only $562 million. And the debt to GDP ratio we are talking about was 37%, all right? We had an economy on a firm foundation, very firm, with airports and seaports and infrastructure poised for growth. That was squandered. That was squandered. By 2006, we were at $1.6 billion debt. $1.1 billion in 10 years. You tell me about we were borrowing. We were borrowing in the past. The borrowing that happened in 10 years was more than St. Lucia's entire lifetime up until 1997. So something is fundamentally wrong here. The second thing I want to say is that, you know, if you look at how resources are being utilized in St. Lucia, they are far from optimal. You look at the construction, for example, of, we know the example in the early 2000s, the Soufrière-Vieux-Fort Road. I mean, this is a financial nightmare, a financial mismanagement nightmare. This was supposed to cost this country $44 million. It ended up costing $133 million, 3 times what was projected to cost. These inefficiencies, I have to highlight some of these, not just for the sake of pointing at things, but for making the point that we're doing something fundamentally wrong. Today we are building a bridge in Bois d'Orange. This bridge is costing us $11 million to build. And how many years? 3, 4, 5. Nobody seems to know. Since when a bridge that accommodates just 2 40-foot containers should cost us $11 million to build? You see, the point I'm trying to make, and it goes on and on, there are so many inefficiencies in the way the economy has been managed. And I would argue that at all these types of discussions, I hear people saying time and again, it's not, the problem is not how Kenny runs the country. The problem is not how this government runs it. If you look across the region, you see a bunch of labor parties in power. And the Labour parties, they run the countries in a manner that causes more debt and more inefficiency and no economic growth. To put in perspective what I'm talking about, you know, the economic growth that you get, I'll give you some numbers in a while. The economic growth that you got in the Compton era, $1 of debt would bring you about $54 of economic growth, okay? In the Kenny regime, every dollar of debt brings about $24 of economic growth. So the debt is being contracted, but the economic growth is flat. And any perusal of the data between 1997 and 2006 will show that you had like just 1 or 2 periods of about 3 or 4% growth. Everything else was flat. And it's simply because money is being taken out and put into activities that are not productive. There are no jobs created, there's no economic expansion, so you have problems, right? I want to say also that we have to do something about the government's responsibility in terms of multilateral diplomacy and in terms of its foreign affairs. The multilateral diplomacy I'm talking about, for example, we have a case where this government of St. Lucia has gone on its own, the Prime Minister, by the way, on his own, and signed the deals with Grindberg to mine our seabeds, okay? A Grindberg character who everyone knows throughout this region was a scam. He had done similar injury in Jamaica and some of the islands in the Caribbean. No due diligence was performed. Not only no due diligence, but also the fact that this Grindberg made a deal with the Chinese National Offshore Oil Company, out of which he as a broker was making $2 billion. The media, by the way, has not covered this event sufficiently, and I think something has to be done about this. It's a very important issue. Today, St. Lucia is in the courts. St. Lucia is before the IICD, ICSD, to try and settle a dispute. And if we can't get this dispute on our side, we're in trouble. But I want to highlight the importance of rule of law, because in the case of the Grindberg affair, the rule of law was not followed. We have a case where the Prime Minister is signing on to a deal that the people of St. Lucia had not authorized signature for. The same applies with ALBA, because ALBA is an agreement that seems to be a secret deal between the government of St. Lucia and the Venezuelan government. Why can't it be displayed and shown in public? If it's an agreement in the interest of every St. Lucia and St. Lucians, it should be shown in public sphere for everyone to see. So I think we need to talk about how do you, in terms of solutions, there has to be perhaps constitutional reform so that the Minister of Finance cannot perform some of those acts I just mentioned and go away unpunished. There should be sanctions. There should be measures in the law that make provision for penalties after, violation of the country's way of operating. I want to say something briefly about the reforms, because the discussion tonight is about reforms to a large extent. There is on the table a proposal to cut the public servants' salaries by 5% in order to contain the deficit. We had the same story again. But the thing is, you know what? This economy is in free fall. Free fall is when you drop something in a vacuum, it just goes down like lead. And we're going to cut the private sector salary. We're going to cut the public sector wages. What's going to happen is that we'll have more economic contraction, because public servants have a very, very large propensity to consume. Every extra dollar they have is spent on things that they need: food, clothing, shelter, etc. So when you cut on their wages, you effectively cutting the economy, and you actually causing the economy to contract. I believe that rather than look at cutting public servant salaries, you know what the truth of the matter is? 10 of the consultants of government, the salaries that are paid to 10 government consultants, working at about $9,000 on the average, and that's the low-end consultants, could cover the cut the 5% cut of 500 teachers or police officers, right? 500. So government can trade this. What do you want to trade? 500 teachers' jobs or 10 consultants? And all these consultants, I am a consultant in private practice, right? I don't go to a government office on a payroll. I'm in private practice. And if these people were real consultants, they would be in private practice, okay? And all this non-productive activity we see happening should not be taking place. So,
okay, Dr. Preville, I know you have enumerated quite a few of what I would consider the sins of the government at this time. And I will give Dr. Hilaire an opportunity to respond. But I did indicate to you that you should tell me whether there was something that is not being done at the moment that could be done in terms of lifting us out of this dire situation. We'll come back to you in just a moment. Dr. Hilaire?
Well, I thought tonight we were going to engage in a mature dialogue about where we are in the country and how it is we're going to face some of our challenges. It's very easy to go cheap, and it's very easy to take, easy shots at issues. Because we can change the tone. Because if you speak of the Southwest Coast Road and how much it costs, I will say to you that there is a road, but the Daher Mall was about what, $15 million? The Ritz-Carlton lands, another $65 million. Where is it? Where is the productive output of the Ritz-Carlton, the Daher Mall? And you want to speak of those persons in government and how they function. But and speaking of the same people, whether they should be allowed to run the country. But I recall a commission of inquiry stating that Mr. Alan Shastney should, or was it a judge, should never be in politics again because of his conduct in the Tuxedo Villas affair. And I can tell you about Mr. Mondesi when he was a minister, what the court rulings were. And I can take you down the journey of the last 5 years, the indecency we had in government. I can speak about all the ills of the last government and ask you whether in your good conscience you can ever stand up anywhere and defend the same group of persons coming back into power in St. Lucia. But the point, though, is for us not to go down that road. Because I think we've reached a point in the country where we need to have a mature dialogue as to how we should move forward. Because sometimes I heard it talk about borrowing. Those of you who remember in 1997, 4,000 school children would do common entrance. And there would only be school places for about 1,000 in this country, in St. Lucia. Then the government of the St. Lucia Labour Party went about, under the leadership of Mario Michel, to undertake a universal secondary school program where every single child in St. Lucia will be guaranteed a secondary education. And gone are the days of the shift system. Remember the shift system? Gone are the days of children passing common entrance, but no school places for them. That took borrowing. You had to get loans, you had to build schools. And in a sense, if you are going to be honest in the dialogue and say that money was borrowed and we did not see the productive use of it, I need you to tell me, under 5 years of the last government, one large-scale development project that took place in St. Lucia, just one. And I can give you a string of projects that can account for borrowing that took place, during the period 1997 until 2006. So let's not engage in that kind of cheap political exchange because I don't think it helps the purpose. I think Richard set a stage for us to have a very high-level discussion about the country and where we should go. And when you start bringing issues of Greenberg and whether somebody broke the law, I can give you examples of laws that have been broken in St. Lucia between 2006 and 2011. In fact, I believe, as a matter of fact, people who were in government then should be banned from ever holding public office in St. Lucia again. But we're not here for that tonight. Let us keep the level of the discussion where we can all learn from each other, where we can use our intellect in a very constructive manner, and not take cheap shots. So let's proceed.
Well, I do think, and I'm sure persons listening will learn at least that both sides are capable of leading us down a particular road that perhaps is not the best for the country, and both sides can contribute in terms of our development. Agree or disagree? Right? And as Richard had indicated earlier, there is a need for what we call national consensus at this time. When a government makes a decision, whether in opposition, whether now in opposition or presently in government, workers are the ones who usually have to sort of bear the grind. And this is where the Chamber of Commerce comes in. You have heard the contributions of two men from political parties, or representing the views of political parties, Mr. Louisy. How does the Chamber deal with situations such as that, the changing, if you wish, landscapes of governments, and how it impacts on the workers of the country?
Let me thank, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me thank Jerry for moderating this program. Let me thank wVent TV, radio, for inviting me to be part of the panel. Let me thank Richard for his comments. And what I would say is that the Chamber will deal with it the very same way you dealt with it. We let them speak to each other, and we stick to the issues. The reality is that St. Lucia has faced and is facing some very tough economic times and challenges. We have not been able to recover from the recession. The global recession has certainly impacted us, and I don't think we necessarily have managed our affairs well enough to counteract the effects of the global economic recession. Richard pointed out some fundamental issues which I think we need to deal with as a country. I think the Prime Minister pointed it out in his budget presentation, and Richard focused on them earlier, where he spoke about low investment, high unemployment, and I think that is a very serious issue we need to find a way to deal with, and we need to address. 23% unemployment is something that we should all be concerned with. And when we think of how that number is broken down, in some communities, 40% of the youth are unemployed. That is a startling figure, and I think we need to focus on unemployment and finding ways of engaging the young persons. We have high debt, which leads to high debt payment. We have high recurrent expenditure, and we have low recurrent revenue. What really happens is that the government of St. Lucia is spending more money on its normal operations than it's taking in. And this has happened for quite a while. And we need to turn that around. What ends up happening is that the government cannot invest in its own long-term investment. It needs to borrow to do that. Now, let's put it in the context of your own personal income. You earn $1,200, but you're spending $1,500. How are you going to take care of your future? You're going to the bank to ask the bank to help you cover the extra $300. This is not sustainable, and St. Lucia has found itself in that same situation. When you don't have money for investment, you therefore stifling your ability to stimulate economic growth. And you are borrowing money, and so the cost of stimulating economic growth is exceedingly high. We need to change that figure. We need to change that formula. We need to change that scenario. And this is why in the budget, the Prime Minister pointed out that the fiscal deficit is the overriding problem. The challenge we face is that in economics, you never have a one-handed economist. What they will tell you is that on one hand, if you do this, you are going to, and you could have these results, but on the other hand, but this is really about trade-offs. What trade-offs are we willing to make in the country? And the issue, I think, as Richard pointed out, is getting national consensus. And national consensus doesn't mean we all agree. I think it's more important we all know. We all have a path that we know we're walking down, and we know what we're doing, where we're going. We understand why. So we need to find that consensus. We need to find a consensus as to what are the priority issues and how we are going to tackle them. I believe that unemployment and the high level of unemployment is crucial. How do we address that? That, I think, is a major issue. But in tackling that issue, we need to look at the fact that we need to invest to create employment. We need to engage in activities that create employment and generate income. But we have to ensure that we have more revenue and more income than it costs us. Now, that simple formula of having enough savings to invest is where the rubber hits the road. I'm not sure if we can always depend on foreign direct investment. I believe the fundamental issue we have to resolve is our productivity and our production. Can we produce more than we can consume and have that excess return to the economy? It's not happening sufficiently in tourism. We are selling tourism services. Yes, we are getting returns, but is it filtering to the rest of the economy sufficiently? Richard has spoken about in tourism, it is growing, but not sufficiently fast. There's not enough linkages. How do we change that? How do we leverage that which we have as a nation to sell, that we get the returns for us to develop, employ our people, feed our people, provide social services for the country? I think these are the issues we need to address and tackle.
I just want to ask Mr. Peterkin to explain what he means by national consensus, because what you were saying is that we need to know, not necessarily agree, but I'm thinking also that there is room for bipartisan effort. Mr. Peterkin, is that your thinking when it comes to national consensus?
I understand that in politics, and I mean, we all, in the Caribbean and many countries in the world, we have different models in which you have more than one party, and it's almost required in a sense that they constantly try to show that they are better than the other party so that, they can get elected the next time. That's normal. So to that extent, we will always have a certain degree of bickering, one-upmanship, and finger-pointing going on in politics. Many people feel the opposition only is there to say no, and the government yes. And if you look at the US, for example, you can see how sad it has become there between the Republicans and the Democrats. It's gridlock. They can almost do nothing. Mr. Obama has been a major disappointment to many people because he's just not been able to produce the change that he had promised when he first came in 6 or 7 years ago. And the same here. It's a very illusory thing. I mean, national consensus is really the effort to at least, first of all, agree that we have common problems and that there are no easy solutions, and that whoever caused these problems, we're probably not going to be able to put them in jail. If we could, then fine. But I mean, if we can't, then talking about it is just not good enough. So what we then have to say is, all right, are there solutions that allow both parties to say, I agree on the solution, I would just handle it a little differently, and I'm a better manager. So let's at least agree on the solutions and say, all right, to get there, you're going to have a number of different institutions that provide these bipartisan type groupings that will achieve that. And part, I think, of our problem as to why we are where we are and why we can't seem to get ourselves through it is many of our institutions have failed us. There was a time in which the church perhaps could produce that kind of consensus. There was a time when the chamber had a massive amount of people walking in the street because they weren't happy with what a particular government was doing. And it showed that it was a case of educating people, hearing and getting input from everybody, and then using coordinated action. So it's not an easy thing. We all talk about it, but getting to that point is difficult. And it's just as important to have the dispute settlement mechanisms so that the issues that divide us can be put to bed or at least dealt with by professional groupings that can deal with them in such a way that people accept them. If we like rule of law, for example, then let's find the legal mechanisms that could deal with the issues that we quarrel about. But we can't keep quarreling. Because all that is happening now, you hear it on the talk shows, you hear it all over the place, finger pointing, blaming who caused the problem, and no solutions, none whatsoever. So my point is, I know how difficult it is, but I've seen some other countries actually come to conclusions and mechanisms that can deal with it, and sometimes not even without having to change governments. And we've had many changes of governments over the last 10, 15 years, and to a large extent, we've seen common problems, common faults, and we can't say that anyone has clearly taken the path that has brought us to, the end of the rainbow. So the question is, it's needed, but it's how we get there is the more difficult thing.
Dr. Preville, can I ask you and get from you, yes or no, do you think that there is room for a national consensus, bipartisan, we talking together, coming up with the solutions that Mr. Peterkin outlined in terms of seeing St. Lucia through the situation that he presented to us, bleak economic situation with few options? Yes or no? Sure. Do you see room for a national consensus? Yes or no?
Of course.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Hilaire, do you see that there is room for national consensus? Yes or no?
It's the only way forward.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I wanted to add something.
Okay, add something.
Yeah, I mean, it's always easy to ask questions like the one you asked. Do you see a consensus, yes or no? I mean, of course, yes.
Well, I'm asking this because, just hold on, I'm asking this because for as long as I can remember, we have all spoken about bipartisan effort, whether it is to address the issues of crime, whether it is to address the way children are treated, women are treated, etc. But we have never come to the point where we say, okay, let's put the differences aside and let's discuss the issue to the point where we can come to some manageable solutions.
Okay.
That is why I'm asking that.
Sure. I mean, the point is, a couple of points.
Yes.
First of all, I am not about, putting issues out there to create confusion. The point is, I put things in context, and by the way, again, I differ with my colleague opposite. The point of the matter is that we got to where we are as a consequence of certain things we did wrong. Okay? So I cannot and I will never accept anyone telling me, forget about how we got here, how do we get out? Because if we don't know how, for example, you want to get to Louisy Lane, you jump in your car and you point it south and you end up in Vieux-Fort after an hour and a half, right? You'll be surprised. You go in the wrong direction. So obviously you will end up in Vieux-Fort. So my point is, we have to appraise, whether we like it or not, whether we think fingers are being pointed or not, and we're facing the skeletons in our closets, we have to face the reality of how we got there. Because that is where the answer lies. The answer lies in the question, okay? And what do I mean by this? How do we got where we were, and how the economy is where we are today, is because of, one, implementation of the VAT at a very high rate at a time when the economy was almost on the brink of collapse. So this VAT has become it's like, when you do dialysis, you have this machine sucking the blood out of you. This VAT has come in and it is bending this economy and is busting at the seams. So you talk about consensus. We have to have a consensus on what is a sensible level of taxation that will allow the economy to expand, okay? Because you don't just keep taxing and taxing and think that more money. No. There is a function in economics, there's a Laffer curve, there's a function. It says when you increase the tax rate too much, you reach a point where the tax actually starts going down. And that's where St. Lucia is right now. Our tax revenue intake is going down because the tax rate is too high. And there is not enough productive economic activity, by which I mean there aren't enough firms producing services and goods selling in the economy. The only way we will get there is not by borrowing money and having step programs. That will never get us there. The only way we will get there is when we start taking money, whether it's borrowed or it's the result of economic growth. We take this money, we invest in activities that will generate economic growth. And I think the kind of activities are there. We have, for example, agro-processing. I think this is something that's a low-hanging fruit. Why aren't we investing money in agro-processing, right? I go to supermarket, the Super J's and Mega J's. You see plantain chips, you see all kinds of silly things on the shelf. All they really have is just a little label from Costa Rica or some other country. We could just do a little bit of value addition, and we need not buy those things from Costa Rica or the other countries coming from. So you have that. You have the creative industries. We are talking about them. I'm not seeing much happening yet. A lot more needs to be done in developing the creative industries. We have some trailblazers like Boo Hinkson, but we need a lot more to be done to give this sector a stimulus. The construction sector itself, there are many things we could do, but the policy of government has to change. And we cannot have a government coming into power pursuing an expansionist policy regime with spending that is borrowed and expect somehow we're going to get out of this mess. To put it in very layman terms, what I see this government doing right now is taking a loan to buy bread to feed the poor, right? What I would do differently, I would take the same loan to build a bakery to make sure everybody has bread to eat. That is the difference. And that is the fundamental difference in the economics. Because you take a loan to buy bread, when you have consumed the bread, you have to find money to pay back the loan. Where's it going to come from? You have to find new money again, okay? You build a bakery, then you have a means of producing bread, and you have a means of bringing revenue. And this is the concept that has to be understood. I think unless we get into this, we're in trouble. Okay? So the consensus that Richard is talking about has to resonate around sensible macroeconomic policy. That's number one. The second has to be more responsible governance, because I maintain again, I think, and again, we can probably do this through constitutional reform or through stronger legislation, so that those in public office don't do what they feel like doing. They do what the law allows them to do. Right? But I've also learned that if you have a law, a rule, a regulation that says, do not do this, but there isn't a penalty regime attached to it, there is no reason why I should not do it. Because what are you going to do to me? There are no sanctions. You see my point? So I think consensus, yes, but we have to understand where we go with the consensus. One last point. Part of the reason why this economy is bleeding and almost at its knees is because private spending, we have lost about $300 million. In 2 years, $300 million was taken out of the GDP, okay? The GDP of an economy is a function of the consumption, government spending, exports, imports, and so on. When you take government spend and investment, by the way, very big important one, investment. But when you government spending and right now, investment is flat. It's almost zero. We have no foreign investment in the last couple of years, right? I hope Dr. Hilaire brings us some FDI, because we had none for the last couple of years. So that is zero, okay? The private spending in the equation, we take out $300 million from the economy. And these are numbers, by the way, from the Economic and Social Reviews, different series, 2012, 13, and 11, etc. You can get these numbers right there. So when you've done that, how do you expect that economy to grow? We need to understand that what we're doing there is madness. And the policies are wrong, and this is why we are getting the wrong results.
Dr. Hilaire?
Yeah.
Very strong language there.
Let's go back a few years. In 2006, the country, and I think Richard showed it on a graph, was going through the highest levels of foreign investment in this country. Richard referred to Cricket World Cup. You would recall the government at the time had put in place certain measures to offer incentives to get investors, and both local and foreign, to invest more in the country. Richard made the point that it was not just the Cricket World Cup activities, there was also a lot of financing available globally, and that's true. But you need to put in place the measures that will attract people to come to your country. And in 2 years before 2006, up to 2007, St. Lucia had never seen such foreign investment, and unemployment was the lowest in about 20 years. That's in 2006. The stagger effect for 2 years after, people still finishing projects started for Cricket World Cup and the investment, so it would decline eventually. From about 2008, 2 years after the change of government, we've never seen any serious investment in this country for 2 reasons. The reputation of St. Lucia became so bad because every investor who comes to St. Lucia had to pay a premium to certain people to come and invest in St. Lucia. And the stories are well known, I do not need to repeat it. Our reputation got very bad, and we're still struggling now to tell investors, foreign investors, that things have changed in St. Lucia. And I know it because I am out there as a representative of the government. But also, too, our mechanisms, our infrastructure for dealing with investment had gotten almost out of context, and which is why this government, one of the first things it did was transform NDC into Invest St. Lucia, to modernize the mechanisms for handling foreign investment, and as well to change the Incentive Act to be able to give more attractive and relevant offerings to investors to come to the country. So it is true, we've not had any major investments in the last 8 years in St. Lucia, but there is work being done by this government to change the landscape, to once again make St. Lucia attractive to bring in more investment into the country. You asked a question about national consensus. We need to have a national consensus. We need to agree on what are the fundamentals that are required to make St. Lucia more attractive and more competitive. And you were right, but I'm not sure if it's you or Richard who said it. The difference will be how one maybe manages. Some may be better managers than others. Once we agree on the broad framework, what our deficit should be, what our employment targets should be, what our growth rate targets should be, we should agree on those things as a country. Now, how you go about doing it can vary from party to party. Because I heard, Claudius made mention about he would take a loan to build a bakery, but nobody will come and buy the bread. That's a problem, because the people he expected to buy the bread have no income. So, do you say to a country like ours, with such a high unemployment rate, that you will not provide for the indigent and the poor and those who are unemployable in this country? If you don't do that, we're going to have a social explosion in this country. When we are talking about bringing in investment, encouraging creative industries, encouraging agro-processing, there are people in this country that cannot survive. What are you going to do with them? If you believe we have a problem with crime now, just imagine if no support is given at all in these hard times to thousands of people out there who cannot find employment or bread for them to eat or money to buy school books for their children. Government cannot be insensitive. The government has to put in resources in the productive sector, but at the same time, the government must have a social conscience. And any government that tells you today is going to abandon the disadvantaged people, the people who cannot be employed, I think is an insensitive government and would be a government that has no feelings for the people that it represents. Let me make one final point. And I've read this argument on Facebook. And sometimes when you hear arguments, you now put in names to pseudonyms and names to all false names. This argument about private spending declining in the country. If there are people who believe that Kenya Anthony caused the economic problems because he told St. Lucians to tighten their belts because times were going to be hard, and in so doing, people stopped spending and the economy has gotten bad because of that. Just a simple thing. If you encourage all St. Lucians to start having parties and start having barbecues and spend money, do you think the economy will take off and everything will be hunky-dory once again? The reality is that there are people who are not spending because prices have increased. So they have a smaller the same amount of money, but they can buy less things because the prices have gone up. There are people who have money and they're not spending because they're not sure what will happen tomorrow, and they're not spending as they used to spend before. They become more disciplined in the expenditure. When people spend money in St. Lucia, a high percentage of the expenditure is actually on goods that we don't produce in St. Lucia. So to encourage private spending, for example, you tell me refurbish my house, buy more, change my settee, change my television, whatnot. I can go online. I can order a television. I can order a new settee. It comes to the ports here. I clear it and I take it to my home. How much of that $2,000 I would have spent is actually invested in the economy? Because we spend so much on imported items, we need to be careful with the belief that if we just encourage St. Lucians to start spending and increase private spending, the economy will take off once again. That's very armchair and theoretical economics. The reality is that it is different. A lot of what we import are foreign products. And whereas there is some effect, the more you spend, it is not as great as some people would want us to believe.
Dr. Hilaire, thank you very much. At this point, we would like to inform you that we have opened a microphone for anybody from the floor who wishes to ask, and I must stress this, a question. Right? Ask a question. Please do not go on for too much of a preamble before you ask your question. So ask your question. The mic is right there.
Good night, everybody.
Right.
To you at the end, sir.
Dr. Hilaire.
I would like to ask you a question. If you have a bakery and I cannot afford to buy bread as a citizen of St. Lucia, who should I blame?
If I have a bakery and you cannot afford to buy bread, who should you blame?
Yeah. Okay, the answer is that the government is responsible for food, clothes, and shelter for its people. It doesn't mean government have to come and hand out food, clothes, and shelter. Government have to create projects, work, that everybody could get work. Then you could sell your bread in your bakery. Am I right or wrong, sir?
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
Well, that is all I have to ask you for this present moment.
No, but
thank you, sir.
no, but the point is, but that's how I said off by speaking. You must create economic activity. You must create economic activity. And how do you create it? Government can either borrow money to do it, hold on, or government can invite foreigners or local investors to invest money. Where we've reached in our country, we cannot continue to borrow. So we must either encourage local to spend or external to spend. Now, Brian earlier said about foreign direct investment, about how much we should depend on it. The truth is that we do not have so much money in St. Lucia locally that we can finance our development entirely by ourselves. We cannot. So we have to find multiple ways to do it. And that's the point we've been making. There are certain things that need to be put into place to allow us to be able to get people to invest money in the country.
Okay, sir. One more question for you.
Do you agree with me?
I'm not quite agree with you. One more question I would like to ask you.
The last question from
The
you.
last question.
Thank you.
Where are the investors who are coming to this country? How long would it take us to see investors coming to our shores? How long since the government is there, sir? Can I ask you how long this government is there? Just about a little over 2 years. So how long from this day to day would it take the citizens of St. Lucia to see investors coming to our shores?
So that's a very good question. Very good question.
Thank you, sir.
But let me give you the answer.
He's stopping me.
Huh?
No.
No, you can sit and hear the answer. Thank you very much. Anybody else needs a question? Yes.
No. I made a point. You asked how long we have to wait before investors come. And I pointed out, and I said it a couple of times, one of the first things this government had to do was to establish the Invest St. Lucia, because we realized from very early investors did not have confidence in St. Lucia after the last 5 years. They did not have confidence. So you had to reorganize Invest St. Lucia. You had to reorganize your incentive scheme because we were no longer competitive. St. Kitts was ahead of us. Other countries were now ahead of us. So we now needed to create the confidence once again. And the Prime Minister announced 3 weeks ago, when the Labour Party came into power, there were about 5 projects in St. Lucia in receivership. About 5 of them. Since then, all of them have now been bought by investors and taken over. Landings is one. The Smugglers, Morgan Bay, and there were a couple of others, Marigo Bay. There were about 5 projects that had gone into receivership. And in 2 years, he's been able to get 5 investors to come in and take over those projects. And there are discussions going on for other projects to get started. But we're now finding that we've lost ground in 5 years. We've fallen so far behind. So we now need to catch up and to modernize our laws, modernize our institutions to be able to become attractive once again. Because the investor will not just walk into your country and just spend money if he doesn't have confidence that he'll get a return on his investment. So it is difficult, but the point is you have to do the fundamentals to be able to be attractive once again. And remember the point I made, when the government left in 2006, we were attracting the highest levels of investment in the Caribbean, the highest levels in 2006. But by 2011, we are among the lowest in the Caribbean. That is just the reality of what it is.
Please come to the microphone if you have a question.
Okay, good evening. I am not here to engage or debate with your panel.
Ask a question.
Yeah, but I also want to make
question.
on a point of correction. I think my investigations have shown that, you mentioned one of the projects, the landings, I never think that project was in receivership based on my investigation. So you may want to check your facts on the landings in particular. Before I go further, I just want to make a comment on Mr.
Just before you go ahead, Mr. Peterkin.
Oh, no, the actual landings was in receivership. The receiver was Mr. Anthony Bristol, and he has concluded a sale.
Okay, all right, but let me just make another point here. In your presentation, Mr. Peterkin, I was following your presentation very closely, up to the point where you delve into the whole unemployment situation. And you made a statement when you highlighted the figures of unemployment, and you spoke about youth unemployment. And you said, if people lose hope. And then you went on to say about some of the things that would happen if people lose hope, about the crime, the high level of crime, and so on. I was a little perturbed about that if that you placed before that statement, because a lot of what you said could possibly happen is already happening in this country. So it's not really a question I want to put to you. I just want to put that to you, that was a little suspect, you making that comment and saying if. But the real question I want to ask you this evening is to Mr. Hilaire. Interestingly, you spoke about the FDI, the foreign direct investments, and you also spoke about, not your words exactly, but the damage control that this government is doing out there in the market in terms of attracting foreign direct investment into the country because of some of the damage that was done before. But I must point out to you, Mr. Hilaire, that some of the damage was actually done by the current Prime Minister, who in his statements previously, when in opposition, actually asked investors not to come to St. Lucia. And a lot of that information was placed on the internet. And a lot of that information is there up to a day like today. Now, very often in St. Lucia, we talk about governance and government as if, immediately one government goes out and another one comes in.
Can I ask you to ask the question?
Okay, my question is, do you think in your own rightful thinking that some of the damage that has been caused is what we as a country, governments, ministers, especially some of those when in opposition, have put out there on the internet, and some of it is still there today causing damage to foreign direct investment in this country?
Well, I'll tell you, I did not hear the Prime Minister tell investors do not come to St. Lucia. But if he did, I'm sure the Prime Minister can address that, deal with that. What I can tell you for a fact is that there were investors who were coming to St. Lucia and they were reporting that ministers were asking them for payments to invest in St. Lucia. Now, that's not, hearsay. I can tell you it was a fact and it was known. I can tell you as a fact that there was a severe loss of confidence in St. Lucia because of just the conduct of government in St. Lucia. We had the Tuxedo Villas affair. We had the courts making rulings about ministers of government. And that undermined confidence in the country. So I don't know, and you said Kenny Anthony told investors, don't come to St. Lucia anymore. One thing I can tell you, if an investor is going to come to St. Lucia, he's going to make 15% returns on his investment. Kenny Anthony in opposition telling him not to come to St. Lucia will not stop him. Think it through. Think it through. You come in to build a hotel in St. Lucia. You've done all your calculations and you know this is a profit you can make. And an opposition leader is saying to you, oh, don't come to St. Lucia to invest, so you'll change your mind and go elsewhere because of that? Is that how business decisions are made? But I can tell you, if that investor knows when he comes to St. Lucia, for him to acquire a lease, he has to pay X amount of millions of US dollars. He may not come. That is a reality. No, but the damage control is when you sit with an investor and he tells you, we've been thinking for the last how many years to come to St. Lucia. We're thinking of going to another island. Can you assure me that when we get to St. Lucia, we will not have to pay this person X amount or pay anybody anything? And you can say to them, those days are long gone. There's a transparent process. There's an agency you can go to. You can do that. You can build confidence in a destination. And there are people likewise that will say to you, the problem is not politicians. It is your outdated laws, your laws on access to the Queen's Chain, your laws for approvals. So I don't want you to get the impression it was only one issue that made us unattractive. There are a number of issues, and we needed to modernize our investment infrastructure in the country.
Dr. Hilaire, I'll give Dr. Preville an opportunity to respond.
Thank you, Jerry. Just a couple of points I want to make on the issue of investment. Personally, I'm of the view that investment is not just a matter of supply and demand. There's profits there, I'm going to put my money there or not. There are other things, the investment climate, as Ernest said, I think I agree with that. But then, you know what? What complicates the investment climate is also our relations with other countries, our diplomatic relations, right? This week, just last week, we had a voting at the UN on the Ukraine issue. St. Lucia abstained, okay? Yes. I want to ask the Prime Minister, what is St. Lucia's official position on Ukraine, right? You have ALBA, and ALBA is not just something we must take lightly. We have a club of countries, some of them in the Caribbean, in the CARICOM, but we have some that are communist countries, socialist countries, that are enemies of the United States. Now, do you think, Dr. Hilaire, that American citizens will willingly come and invest money in St. Lucia if they believe there is uncertainty in terms of relations between their country and the United States? I think we have to understand those issues. So it is complicated. It's not only a matter of saying you go and invest St. Lucia and you're going to put a diplomat out in London or Brussels and the investment is going to come in. You have to send a comprehensive, correct signal to investors if they will come to St. Lucia. Otherwise, the $100 million that Prime Minister Anthony told all St. Lucians, it's in the manifesto, it was not on the platform promise alone, it would be invested upon assuming government. What happened to it? Where are those investors? Were they in MH17 that was shut down? We have not seen them up to now. I think we have to understand that, you know, as a government in office, when you've made promises, you know, and when you've made concrete promises like these that actually get people to vote for you for your agenda, you have to deliver on it. On the issue of social conscience, I think here we are, we have to make some serious horse trading in the economy, right?
What's that?
Horse trading. I say horse trading. Buy and sell, give and take.
Oh.
What's happening now, we have VAT on sugar, salt, all kinds of basic necessities, okay? How do you rationalize such policy measures in the context of a government with a conscience? I can't understand it myself, you know? These are the things that, you know, on the one hand, the Labour Party governments have this populist program, STEP, and NICE, and SMILE, etc. But the things that will actually help St. Lucians and make a difference, you know, subsidies in the education sector, right? Food feeding, school feeding programs and so on. these are the areas that are being hurt and being targeted when you're removing subsidies, right? I can't understand how you rationalize that with a government that's supposed to have a conscience and has interests of solutions at heart. We have to look at the big picture of what we are doing. And I think the message that is coming across right now is not the positive message for me. Invest St. Lucia has been rebranded, but has it been given? I think there is one issue there, the issue of legislation. Does it have any legal teeth to actually go all the way and be the one to bring an investor into St. Lucia? It has to go to a minister at the end of the day. So we have to revisit that. There is discretion in terms of who is made investment, who actually makes an investment in St. Lucia. I know one local hotelier was trying to get an investment done for the past $45 million in St. Lucia. It took about 11 months to get his investment papers approved. 11 months, a local hotelier, okay? So we have to understand, when we talk about, I have mentioned and highlighted tonight the importance of legislative reform. I think in terms of consensus building that Richard spoke about, we have to revisit our laws. We have to see where maybe certain ministers and prime ministers have too much power, and we have to see what we will do to make things different in terms of the efficiency of service delivery in our country. Thanks.
We'll take another question from the floor, please. Sir, no, let's leave.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Could you put the mic back, please? Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
All right, good evening, gentlemen. Before I get to my question, I will quote a friend of mine, and that's to you, Dr. Hilaire and Dr. Preville. The youth think that both parties have failed them. They call you two bickering parents and ignoring what's going on the ground. Now, Dr. Hilaire, my question to you is, two questions. Do you believe the unemployment rate now among the youth is a case of no jobs, as in the economy, or that they are unemployable? And with that, I will ask my other question, which is, do you really have confidence in that the Labour Party's bid or quest to provide universal secondary education is really heading down the right path? And I'll tell you why. You provide everybody a place in secondary school, that's all well and good. But when you have children who get a 30% mark at common entrance, going into a secondary school, writing the same syllabus as a young man in St. Mary's College, St. Joseph Convent, with maybe no extra remedial classes, but they expect them to perform at the same level, and every year we have the same cry, children doing badly at MABS, this school does poorly. How are we actually getting our youth prepared for the world of work? So is it a case where that there are no jobs, or they're unemployable at the moment?
I think this is also a question that should be posed to Mr. Brian Louisy, so when we hear from Dr. Hilaire, we would like him to respond as well.
In 1985, I was part of the National Youth Council. One of the things we were calling for as youth leaders was the right for every child in St. Lucia to get a chance to go to university. Not secondary school, university. We call education a right and not a privilege. All my life, I have lived by that. I've dreamt of going to Cambridge or LSE because I believe every St. Lucian child should dream of going to the best universities in the world. Listen to what you're asking me. Whether it is right for every child in St. Lucia to get a secondary school education. Hold on. Whether it was the right thing. And then he explained why he said so. The point is, there may be deficiencies in the education system. You might have a child who gets 40% and goes to a secondary school. And that child probably has particular learning deficiencies, and maybe a full traditional secondary school may not be where that child ought to go. But that does not take away from the principle that every child in St. Lucia must be guaranteed a secondary education. And as a people, we must vision and we must dream. We must have the dream as a people that every St. Lucian child must get a university education someday. We may reach here in 50 years, in 100 years, but we must dream that every single child, Barbados used to offer every Bajan child a chance to go to university. Errol Barrow in the 1960s said that is what's going to make Barbados great. We were in 1997 a situation in this country where a significant percentage of our children could never go to a secondary school. That has changed. The next task for this government will have to be to make sure every secondary school child goes to sixth form college. And in years to come, we will aspire to university. That's how countries transform. That's how you vision. That does not mean there will not be deficiencies in how you implement it and the need to correct it and make sure it fulfills the vision that you have. But you must have a vision as a people. Every child going to secondary school can never be a bad thing. But let's make sure we do it properly.
But Mr. Louisy, are these deficiencies taking too long to address? I think that is the crux of the matter, because what we are seeing happening is that the schools now become a warehouse for lost souls, you know, and that impacts, I'm sure, on the quality of the employee that enters the workforce.
The St.Lucian Chamber of Commerce, its real mandate is to work with the government, advocate, and lobby for improved and a better macroeconomic environment. That includes having a better workforce. Having a better workforce means having people who are better trained and better prepared to work. But not only that, I think earlier we spoke about consensus, we spoke about having a focus, a national vision, and having a strategy. If our people are not able to produce because of poor education, our country is not going to develop. We are seeing some of the problems. I do believe there is a mismatch in skills where some of what is being taught is not particularly helpful, not just for a world of work, because I don't think education is only about a world of work. It's producing a better citizen who's able to cope with life. So we're talking about how could our education system produce a better quality person who is able to function in society. And I think that we must admit there are deficiencies, and I think Ernest is correct. You know, we have to work on it. We have to dream big. We have to dream of having every St.Lucian as a right, having a proper education. But we need to work on it. And I think we have some of these shortcomings. And so the business community and St. Lucia's economy is stifled by the quality of employees, employers, and also it affects our ability to produce, our competitiveness, our productivity. And this is what is hampering our economy and our society. And I think we need to look at these. And when we look at our situation now, we have to look at what are the things we need to tackle. And I think education is a crucial one. We have to continue to invest in education.
Is there one thing the Chamber would like to see any government do in terms of addressing that deficiency that we talk about?
Well, I don't want to just talk strictly about education.
Right, okay.
I think there are some fundamentals that we need to do as a country to deal with our situation. And it is not just short term, it's also long term. I think we have to have a strong philosophy about how we will govern and run our country. Are we going to be a country that does not contain its expenditure, that doesn't use its resources efficiently, doesn't use it prudently, does not use its resources strategically, is not accountable to its people for how it uses its resources, is not transparent, and does not deliver on what people expect of it? I think we need to deal with these things and speak about it, because it will change how we operate. It will change what we do. It will change how productive we are. It will change how efficient we are. And I think we need to start there.
Okay, we have 4 persons waiting to ask questions, so we'll take your question because you were in line first. Yes.
Okay, it's based on education. With 40% of the youth unemployed, do you think it's high time we diversify education to a more vocational schooling, where each and every student get a chance to become something they want to be or they have desire? Because right now, the education system is, I think, is just based on one thing. And with the universal education, that's still not helping. It's still not working. Every year, children still live in school and still going in the streets and do crime. It's high time we diversify the education system and make it a place where everybody get a chance to be something they want to be. So,
in the interest of time, are you asking any of the panelists that particular question?
Well,
because we wouldn't be able to have everybody respond.
I want to ask him that.
Dr. Hilaire.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. But that's why the Cicero.
Thank you, sir.
The Cicero School was built. That's why in Beaufort a technical institute was built. And so you are right. And successive governments, not just Labour Party, have acknowledged the role of vocational education in terms of training our workforce. But a decision was taken many years ago, and Cicero was established, and in Beaufort, the Technical Institute was established for precisely that purpose. There are individuals, pardon me? No, it exists. Cicero Secondary School exists. But the effect, though, is that, and I think Brian made the... No, not Cicero, not Cicero. No, Cicero is not a traditional secondary school.
Let's leave your discussion with for the after party.
Good night. Good night, panelists.
A question, right?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, quickly. I just want to look ahead and find the solution. Mr. Preville, and I totally agree with him when he said, and he quoted Albert Einstein in saying, we cannot depend on the same thinking that created the problem to fix it. Now, I'm a child of the 70s, mid-70s. So I know the thinking that was wrong in terms of friends. When he made the point, and I just sort of surprised he made that point in 2012, that we have to select our friends, looking at our traditional friends. Because to me, it was these friends who our friends, but kept us close, in a close kit. Why can't he see that we can broaden our friendship to choose friends from wherever we want, and so that we can develop our country? Why he think we must close to a couple of friends around who, in the 70s and so, did not see us our friends, did not see us as our friends?
Your question to whom?
So I want to ask him, the question is, how do we go about, in this time in history, select our friends?
Okay. Okay, I mean, apart from our personal social circles, in terms of governance, I say we choose our friends strategically. Okay? We choose our friends strategically. Diplomatic relations is not just about placing an ambassador somewhere and he reporting and stamping passports and visas. That's not what it is, right? When you build you're building relationships, and those relationships are among groupings of states, bilaterally and plurilaterally, multilaterally. And there is an expectation of some degree of solidarity when certain things come up. That's the reality, okay? So I think you'll have a difficult time trying to construct a relationship with extreme polarized views and find some kind of consensus. It's not going to work. It's just not going to work. Because what we see happening, for example, if Ukraine right now, is that the entire Western world would like to see certain things done. And they will rely on countries like us to support their alliance, support what they're doing. That's the reality. So I'm not saying we must not think. Don't get me wrong. And my point is on these issues, I've always said, you know, the investment that Dr. Hilaire is talking about, which is very important, about 90% of the FDI we have come from where? The United States and the European Union. We don't come from Venezuela. With all the ALBA we have, we don't get from Venezuela. We don't get from you know, Cuba gives us more than Venezuela in terms of technical assistance, personnel, etc. Yes, you know. And I think we had an excellent cooperation arrangement with Cuba for quite some time. Okay? But I think we have pushed the relationship in the wrong direction, and I think that is antagonizing our traditional allies. And unless we address this, we have a problem.
Dr. Hilaire?
I mean, maybe if there's one area I can speak about is diplomacy. After all, I am an ambassador. But Claudius, the world has moved on. Who owns Chelsea Football Club? Russia. Who has the largest? Who has the largest?
That will be our next discussion, right?
Okay. Who has the largest shares in Arsenal Football Club? And look at it. The only office that the Taliban has, only office, is in Qatar. Who owns Harrods in London? The Qataris. Who just building the largest development in London? A Chinese consortium. Antigua 2 weeks ago announced $1 billion project by Chinese investors. The world has moved on. There will be issues between East, West, different countries. As a small country, we need to know what our interests are.
Thank you, Mr. Hilaire.
The difference, no, a quick
No,
response on this.
Claudius, just hold on.
Okay.
We have questions.
Sure,
Okay,
go ahead.
thank you.
On the question of investment, we want the money, but from 2006 to 2011, we saw the negative effect of having the wrong kind of money or having the right kind of money the wrong way. You check where I'm coming from, brother? Right, okay. We paid dearly for having the wrong kind of money or for having the right kind of money and using it wrong,
The wrong way,
right?
yeah.
We played dearly on the international stage, right? People looked at us like we were something bad, right? So, not too long ago, St. Kitts Nevis got into they were the economic toast of the small islands. Their recovery was such a miracle. But now, at Trelma, the economic citizenship program has taken the most predictable turn, and now they are the same kind of regional embarrassment that we were in 2006 to 2011. Maybe, yeah, you can't, yeah, it was it. Anyway, as far as I can tell, the kind of millionaires and billionaires we seem to be attracting to St. Lucia in the last couple of years, we seem to be targeting the wrong kind of money. Or, like, explain to us why we would want to go there, or what would prevent us from going there.
Would you like anybody to answer the question?
I want everybody.
One, no. We won't have time for everybody, but would you direct any your question to anybody?
I would like Richard Peterkin to answer that question. Because I'm betting that is where I am likely to get the least bullshit answer.
Richard, go ahead.
The flogger's blood. The reality is now it's nobody even quarrels about where the money comes from. You know, Russia, the Far East, the whole, you know, equation in terms of where money and investment is coming from has changed over the years. But the fact remains, a lot of investors really do. Their problem is not with reputations of government, or you know, or even having to deal with governors. Most of them, their problem is basically trying to get what they want done quickly, and that's where we fall down. Investors that came here to talk to Steve and investors that came here to talk to Kenny both got the same answer. St. Lucia welcomes your investment. When they set about going to do the things they wanted to do, that's where they ran into a problem. And they got delays and hindrances and laws and Napoleonic codes and everything else that clearly just frustrated them. And yet, we still get Capella, which bought an American company which bought Marigold, Sunwing, a Canadian company which bought Smugglers, because St. Lucia still gives a good return. But what they really want is ways of fast-tracking and decision-making and approvals that is not going to waste their time and their money. And I'm not just talking about foreigners either, it's for locals as well. But Jason, you're right. We went through a little period in which, you know, a number of investors told me, boy, you know, we're not sure about the Caribbean. You know, one guy told me when he was in another island, I'm going to say which, the guy pulled him into another room and said, how much are you going to give? 250? You know, when it was really going to be 150. And we...
All right.
No, I'm just saying we got a bad reputation right across the Caribbean. So, from that point of view, what we need to change is the manner in which we deal with people, the institutions we use to deal with investors.
We can continue the discussion after. We have to get off the air, Jason. So let me say thank you very much to all our panelists for joining us. Let's have a round of applause to all of them. I want to thank also you for coming out. Give yourself a round of applause. And I'm sure everybody will agree that this is the type of discussion that we've long anticipated would happen in St. Lucia. And we're off to a good start for our initial program of our town hall meeting. Thank you very much for everybody for coming, and we'll continue our discussion off the air at this time. So, Jason's question was, are we attracting the wrong money when we talk investment? So, since Dr. Hilaire and Dr. Preville have both come to some sort of agreement that investment is vital and important, what are your views? Are we attracting the wrong kind of money?
Well, I'm not sure what that is supposed to mean. So when you say the wrong kind of money, are you saying the sources are bad, the area in which the money is...
Would that fall under economic citizenship? Was that fall under economic citizenship?
I mean, yes. No, but Madoff in New York was sentenced to 100. But Jason, Madoff in the US was sentenced to 100 and something years in jail. In America, I mean, the point I'm making to you is, you attract investors. There's a whole process of due diligence that has to go into assessing an investor, his reputation. There are international laws against money laundering, and there are international institutions one can go to check on investors. It's not foolproof. I mean, there'll always be leaks in here and there, but I don't know what you mean by wrong money, whether it is money laundering, is from drug money, gun running, whatnot. So, or whether you're talking about money through an investment, a citizenship program is bad, because you made reference to St. Kitts now having a bad reputation. Well, I think in St. Lucia, we've generally attracted investors that have good reputation. I don't know, tell me if I'm wrong, but tell me one investor in St. Lucia that was arrested somewhere or illegal. I don't know, tell me. Maybe you know something about investors in St. Lucia. I don't know.
Yes, sir. We'll continue. Next
Dr.
question,
Hilaire.
please. Yeah.
Chairman, my question is to you.
To me?
Yes. Are we limited only to questions to individuals here, or is this a conversation?
Well, now it can be a conversation. We're off the air, yes.
Hello?
Yeah, we can have a conversation, because we were sort of constrained by the airtime.
Okay.
Oh, we're still on there?
No.
I hadn't realized.
Because I can't just ask a simple question to an individual. I would like to make a comment, or a few comments, and probably get a response from anyone there.
Well, you see, if we open up the floor to this,
yes,
then other persons would want to do the same, and then we might not be, that might not be in the best interests of, our timekeeping.
Well, we're not having the conversation then.
Okay.
So if we're not having the conversation, then I will sit.
Well, we are on the air, so as I say, we are constrained by the time on air. I'm sorry. Next question. Are you, sir? Do you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question.
Yeah, let me just
What question? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Should we, you mean the national consensus you're talking about? Use the microphone, please.
Should we?
Apologies. I'm asking the panel, particularly the representatives of the various political groups, their views on whether St. Lucia should adopt a path to economic citizenship.
Oh, okay.
Well, should be a yes or no. No, it's not a yes or no question. Economic citizenship, I'll tell you something. For me, there is what I call economic citizenship, and there is what seems to me to be more economic prostitution. Okay? Economic citizenship for me means you try to attract certain investors because they have made certain investments, not in the treasury, They have made certain investments in the real economy. I mean, they put a hotel, they put a factory, whatever. There are jobs. And that's so important because that's how economic growth happens. When you invest in something real, it could be services as well. But when you have invested in something real, then you have jobs, you have buying, you have selling, you have a whole domino effect of economic activity. You have actually done an investment. But if you just go and buy a passport from the Treasury, I'm very sorry. I am not in any way impressed by this. So I want to understand what government means when it says economic citizenship program. If it is about selling our passports for $1 million a piece, I think this is nonsense. We should not go down that track. If it is about a comprehensive program of attracting investors, of encouraging them to make a certain level of investment, of giving them a temporary residence, of giving them a pathway to citizenship, that's what I would support. The United States has an economic citizenship program. The UK, all developed countries have it. But it's not the case of just handing money over the counter to the Treasury and getting a passport back. You invest in something real, physical, that adds value to your economy. That's why it's called economic citizenship program. It has to add value to the economy. Then you give them a pathway to investment. That I would support.
Now, I know the government has appointed the former Prime Minister of St.Lucian to review that. So there is no final word just yet as far as our economic citizenship program. Am I correct, Dr. Hilaire?
Yeah, you are.
Yes. All right. But next question, please.
No, but I think you say both parties.
Yeah?
No.
Okay. No, we have young lady, please.
No.
Good evening.
She was there before you.
No, but can I say something about the government?
What, about the economic citizenship program?
Parties, but no, we can move on and we could talk about it after.
Good evening.
You're directing
panel.
your question to?
I'm directing my question to the party representative, so that would be Dr.
One
Hilaire.
of them? One of them.
One of them.
Yes, please.
Well, it's a question about party politics in general.
Okay.
So I guess either of you can choose to respond. My question is, when will political parties in St. Lucia start to address the real issues?
Okay, that's the question. We can have both of them answer. So, Dr. Hilaire, thank you very much, miss. When are you going to start addressing the real issues? And it seems to me, as we were talking earlier, national consensus is the avenue for this.
No, I think political parties would want to address the real issues. They would be. But can we just sit down and just reflect? Yeah, St. Lucia. And we all know St. Lucia. You go to a political meeting and it's GDP and figures and percentages. Most people who go to that, and we're talking about examining issues, how deep a social problem is, people tell you those meetings were boring. Essentially, when people campaign, you want them to be able to not speak about the picong and throw in, malpale in each other. You want people to engage the issue and discuss it. And there is a crying for that. And over generations, they've been not crying for it. It is very easy to entertain, because maybe it is that human beings are more easily attracted by entertainment than by in-depth issues. Just look at the size of the crowd here. If it was a Calypsonian singing, how many people would we have there? And it's just that something about us as a people and about our democracy that has not matured, where people are more excited by in-depth examination of issues than just entertainment. But I think people must put pressure on political parties to address the issues and to focus on what really matters in terms of the lives of people. We've come a bit in the last 2 decades. We have a long way to go. But I think as we mature, and events like this one helps a lot by being able to go out there. How many public lectures do we have in St. Lucia? We don't, because that's just the nature of our society. And I want to encourage the organizers to continue events such as this, because this is what's going to help us to mature and force politicians now to start addressing the issue.
And I was coming to the point, based on what Mr. Peterkin said, that we do not have the institutions to sort of pressure these parties to more or less do what we as citizens consider to be the right thing. Any comments on this?
Well, just to say that I think our politics will move to the next level, and the political parties, you know, when the electorate begins to demand more of political parties, when the electorate will not accept bribes, voting day you go and you get $50, yeah, we buy the vote. That's the reality, you have to face it.
Well, and it also means that the parties don't offer it.
Well, that's the point. When, and also, yeah, you know, there can't be a supply without a demand. Eh? I mean, and also when electorate demands, I think our electorate at this time should start demanding empowerment of themselves, not appeasement of their circumstance. That is our problem in St. Lucia. We vote a new party in office, and it's all about, well, you know, this guy looks good. Huh? I want to get $50. By the way, you know, my child has school books. We have to move away from this. And as long the how is about realizing that your life was not meant to be a useless activity of just going around begging. Your life was meant to be an opportunity for you to unfold and develop into something really powerful and really great, that you are actually born with greatness in you, and that you follow political parties or church or any other form of organization to become a better person, a better individual. That's what we have to start teaching people.
Empowerment. Thank you, Dr.
Empower
Preville.
them
Next question, please. I think you made the point already, so go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, first of all, I want to compliment you on an excellent program.
Yes, thank you very much.
And I believe programs like this should continue into the future, where we could encourage more conversation and not just questions among the panelists and those persons there. Claudius, my questions are to you, Claudius. I see you have a smile on your face. I don't know if you were expecting that. I hear you bashing the VAT. I mean, you should know better as to how we arrive at a VAT regime, not only in St. Lucia, but economies, because of the need to eliminate tariffs, import duties, and governments now need to get ways of raising revenue. I mean, obviously the VAT is one of the ways to go, although you could use the sales tax, which is tantamount to the same thing. My issue is that, and this is my position from an economist, I believe VAT should be implemented across the board. There should be no exemptions. You're fully aware that VAT is not performing the way it's supposed to be because St. Lucia has too many exemptions. And if you want to compensate for the poor and indigent persons, you should come and perhaps give them stamps or what have you to identify who are those groups and give them those benefits. But you need to put the VAT across the board. The second issue you raise is to deal with that of the 5% cut. And, you know, I think, and you and I go back a long way from school, primary school, and I think it's a political crop-out to say that we should not go the way of a salary cut. Let's look at how we could get
time. Question, please.
Yes.
Yeah, question.
See,
I'm sorry. I understand what you're saying, and I understand the need for you to sort of provide some sort of content and perspectives, but time. What is your question to Mr. Preville?
It's a bit difficult to answer a direct question.
No, you see, if I allow you, then it sort of does not give Mr.
Okay, well, I mean,
do you have a question?
I will rest because it's difficult to just answer.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Let me say
that will be our last two questions. I'm sorry, miss. This will be our last questioner.
So here's my question. I came here tonight and I'm very pleased that we have a panel of persons very capable of handling exactly what we say we want to do, which is address the economic situation and see ways forward. We almost went down that way. The bickering, you know, flambeau, labor, flambeau, labor. You know, I was happy when Richard came and he said, you know, I have no affiliation to nobody, nothing. Let's deal with the figures, let's deal with the facts. I will say one thing though, we are going the right way. At least now we have the town hall meeting. Persons could come and ask the questions, which brings me to my question now.
Okay.
Speaking of good governance and speaking of accountability, would we see one day in St. Lucia that politicians would sit down and say, listen, let's put things in place. Let's put it in place that, listen, you misuse public funds, 10 years in prison. Will we see a day when politicians come together to say, hey, let us start the charity at home? If we're speaking of good governance, among other things, bringing the investments and everything, if we're going to bring it and everything, will we see that day when politicians will sit and say, you know what? Let's start here in Parliament. Misuse of public funds, misconduct, here is the penalty. Will we see that day?
I think we I think we alluded to what is the beginning point, which is the empowerment of the electorate to make demands on the party and the politicians. Let's go ahead with you, sir.
Yeah, good evening.
Well, it looks like you have a lot to say, but
yes,
a question.
No, not much, but first thing, please. I have two questions. And just,
no, one question. One question.
But I have one for Mr. Hilaire.
No, one question.
It looks like I'll have to give up.
One
but anyway,
question.
let me say that first. I wonder if we have to legislate for due diligence. Because it seems the problem that we are in today is based on a lot of things about due diligence. We probably say Rochamel, we didn't do due diligence. We bought the Diamel, we didn't do due diligence. We went in the RB1, RB2 road, we didn't do due diligence. The whole question of Grindbird, we did not do due diligence.
We got the idea. The
so the point I'm saying is that, do we have to legislate for due diligence? And the other question is, Claudius, do we have to legislate to make sure people do this thing called due diligence? And Claudius, are you saying that the bakery you're talking about, that you want government to establish that bakery, or you want government to facilitate and put the facility in place for someone to establish that bakery? Now, Mr. Hilaire,
no,
please. I'm the last person. I'm the last person. I'm the last person. Mr. Hilaire, Mr. Hilaire, I'm the last person. I'm the last person. I am the last person.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Mr. Hilaire, you are trained. You are trained as a person to negotiate in terms of FBI and so on and so forth. Why?
Thank you very much. Okay. Switch off the microphone. Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay. Okay, Aipa, thank you for the question. You know, do we legislate due diligence? I mean, obviously, from my perspective, anything that's going to add and strengthen controls, we should do. We need to consider what you just said on due diligence. But I think we should also start with even the politicians themselves. The political parties have a role to play. You know, the notion that politicians are all corrupt and dirty, which is what has kept, over the years, so many people out of politics because they figure, well, once I'm in this thing, I'm also corrupt and dirty. You know, we have to do more work, and I think that applies to both political parties. We have to do more work in terms of our screening process, the persons who become candidates in the first place, who become ministers, who become prime ministers. We have to do more work in that regard. And I suppose due diligence is going to help as well if we had a regime in place.
Dr.
Obviously,
Preville,
the bakery is not, okay. I don't believe in government control things, as a rule, and you know that. You know me well enough. I think my point was really that we should put incentives in place to create real economic activity that's going to connect and cause economic growth. So I use the bakery. But that bakery would be by a private owner. It would not be by the government, okay?
Yes, I just want to, as we're ending, I know that everybody has a lot more to say, but as we end our discussion, our town hall meeting today, we did touch on the whole idea of national consensus. And I want to ask representatives of both parties, what is the barrier to reaching national consensus on some very important national issues. From your perspective, we haven't had it. What do you think is the barrier to that?
Power control.
Dr. Preville?
I think the issue of national consensus has not been brought to the table. Full
It
stop.
has not?
Not in a serious and meaningful way. I think there is a need. I spoke about the concept of a vision commission several months ago on some talk show, and I'm happy to see that Dr. Auger is with us tonight. That was actually constituted eventually. The vision I had for this was that that body should be one that consults not just political parties, but consults broad-based across the board and comes up with a vision for St. Lucia and prioritizes maybe 10 things that need to be done in the short, medium, and long term. That is the sort of thing I had in mind. I believe there is space for a consensus on a national vision for St. Lucia, and all political parties can buy into it. Thereafter, we have to do some work in terms of governance. I think the way our constitution is set up right now, the fact that you have to be elected through this political party system, well, almost you have to, because of the way we are, to serve in government in an effective way, for example, as a Minister of Finance, I think it's something that is a bit unfortunate. We have to find ways to strengthen the institutions of governance, and we have to also find ways to improve, accountability, etc. On those issues, I think there will be consensus. Consensus can be found between all political parties.
Thank you. Dr. Hilaire? I was asking, what do you think is a barrier to us getting a national consensus of some of the important issues facing St. Lucia, especially in this environment?
Well, I think the gentleman in the audience answered it, power and control. In a sense, politics is about a contest of power for power. And it's about one side showing that it is better suited to have the reins of government than the other. And therefore, it takes a lot of statesmanship, a lot of character for one to agree that I'm also supporting an initiative from another party, even if when there is space to show how you are different. But no, you want to show, especially if some people are against the government or the government is unpopular, you cannot show that you support an unpopular government. It's an opportunity for you to creep in and to try to get one on that government so you can be elected next time. It's about a contest of power that, when, for example, and I think the point was made, let us set the national targets we must seek to attain. Growth rate over the next 10 years, fiscal deficit, how do we bring down our debt? Let's not discuss how we will do it. Let's just agree that we need to do those things, and parties now can advocate how they think it is best to achieve it. But you won't do that because Kenny Anthony may be looking a little weak now, so let us go all out for him to bring him down so we can win the next election. So it's all about the contest for power and to control the reins of government. And that will always seem to be the barrier. The moment we can sit back, and I'll tell you one thing, if you look at the history of civilization, certain societies have made leaps forward when they've been in crisis. They almost have to go through periods of crisis. Look at Japan after World War II. Look at China. Usually when societies have gone through moments of crisis and people are now forced and they have no choice but to come up with a national agenda, a course of development, that they seem to have been able to achieve some of those national consensus that we're talking about.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hilaire. Once again, I want to thank all of you for coming out this evening to participate in our first ever town hall meeting. And this is a program, an initiative by St. Lucia Talks and the new radio station, wVent. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. I wish to thank all our panelists for being here this evening and for giving us their perspective of an issue which I know that you hold very important and close to your heart. Again, we thank the staff of wVent, St. Lucia Talks, for joining us or for presenting this program. Let me just say to you that this is something that's going to continue, and we're hoping that the next event will be in the south of the island in the next few weeks. So keep listening to wVent, and you will hear further information about this. Thank you very much. Indeed, we are off the air, so we continue the conversation if you wish. Mr. Calix George. let's go. No, yeah, it's finished on the air.